So let's talk Western expansion vocabulary. So first thing we got to talk about is the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act, 1887. According to dictionary.com, it's a federal law intended to turn Native Americans into farmers and landowners by providing cooperating families with 160 acres of reservation land for farming and 320 acres for grazing. This was an assimilation attempt to get them to, hey, listen, we'll have less conflict if you guys, listen, just live like us. Be a little more capitalistic. Own land, don't live tribally. You could still have your land. Those who did not want to live in that manner, did not want to assimilate, so to speak, got pushed west onto reservation, and reservation life was miserable. We'll get there. Let's talk Battle of Wounded Knee. Battle of Wounded Knee is one of the last big events in the struggle between the American military and Native Americans. The Battle of Wounded Knee Massacre is considered the last major conflict between the U.S. Army and Native Americans. It was a one-sided battle where an overwhelming force of United States soldiers killed over 200 men, women, and children of the Lakota Indians. This was just a avoidable situation. It was kind of messy and sloppy. We'll talk about it as we go along, but we'll be able to compare that to, some other battles that, were more actual battle-ish and not just kind of like slaughter-ish, didn't include children and old people and so forth. Case in point, the Battle of Little Bighorn, which was actually a battle, and this was a big win for the Native Americans, but ultimately it just proved that they were more formidable of a foe than the U.S. troops thought they were originally, and a lot of money and resources were pushed out into the West to handle that problem. So it was a victory, but it was a victory that just made the United States take them more seriously, and ultimately ended up with them losing their way of life. The Battle of Little Bighorn is a legendary battle fought between the U.S. Army and an alliance of Native American tribes. It is also known as Custer's Last Stand. He was a Civil War hero, and this is where he met his end. The battle took place over 2 days from June 25th to June 26th of 1876. Now, let's talk about some of the careers that made the West what it was. Can't have the West without cowboys. And what did cowboys do? They performed cattle drives. This is the act of pushing cows or large herds of animals down roads, paths, across states to places where they could either be processed, sold, or shipped to places in the country that had higher populations. Having large herds in sparsely populated areas of the West wasn't as lucrative if we didn't have a way to get them to the large populations where they could be processed for meat or other things. This was a job that became idolized across the country. The image of the cowboy became a very, very impressive and famous thing. And once again, they were performing a service to the country by providing it food. Also, we have prospectors, someone who was looking for mineral deposits. These were risk takers. Many of them spent family fortunes on equipment and moving, and did not find what they needed, what they wanted: gold, silver, copper, or other various materials. Now, something that made both of these jobs a whole lot more lucrative is the Transcontinental Railroad. This was a railroad that stretched from east to west, the East Coast to the West Coast. Private companies employed newly freed African Americans, immigrants, Asian immigrants, many of the Chinese, etc., building railroads in almost unimaginable situations, through mountains, over caverns. But once again, they accomplished what was almost thought to be impossible, and they linked the country together in a way that it never had been before. Now, the resources of the West could be taken advantage of by the East, and it was also a whole lot more lucrative to have large herds or large farms because now I have a larger population that I could sell to. I could sell to the entire country. Now, boomtowns sometimes arise when these things come together. When you have prospectors who find minerals and you have a decent or very simple trip to connect to the railroads, you could have a boomtown emerge. During the gold rush, towns would spring up almost overnight at places where gold was discovered. San Francisco grew from 1,000 people to 30,000 people in a very short time. There are a number of towns that popped up. They exponentially grew because of gold or mineral rushes. And when the prospectors came out, other people came out to support them. They would get hotels, taverns, um, hardware shops, general stores, etc. And once you have that diverse collection of businesses, sometimes you would have the families move out so they could be close together, etc. Now we have a boomtown. Boomtowns exist today as well. Any town that exists because of one industry or one business, whether it be a hospital is planted there, natural gas is discovered there, etc. But the danger of a boomtown, if it doesn't diversify, it becomes a ghost town, a deserted town. A ghost town happens when a town's one major industry disappears. If that hospital or factory moves to a more convenient location, a lot of times those houses aren't valuable or it doesn't make sense living there. It's hard to live there. So people leave. The area dries up because the industry either moved or dried up. Homesteaders, you can't talk about building the West without the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act was an act in 1862 that allowed immigrants, poor people, etc., to buy a piece of land. It could be 160 acres of surveyed government land. The people just had to build a dwelling there and develop the land, farm the land, etc. So just for doing what you probably were going to do anyways, you got a chunk of land, and they really only charged an application fee. There were other stipulations, but this was a program that I don't think it would even go over very well today.